Hello, and welcome back to another Chris McPherson Show Daily Dose. Time to talk some rugby league as the season gets underway and starts to heat up. And we bring in a new guest co-host alongside me, the one, the only, Tony Delany from the Newcastle Weekly Rugby League Guru. TD, good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Chris. Always great to be on, mate. I'm the best-looking man in this studio.
It's a low bar, mate. It's a low bar. And speaking of good-looking men in this studio, if people want to see more of us, they can, of course, hit subscribe, hit like on the video, get involved in the comments as well. Let us know what your takeaways are from the NRL trials. And obviously, we're going to dig in as well to the Payne Haas contract news. And that's probably as good a place as any to start, TD. Payne Haas announcing this week that he will leave the Broncos at the end of this season, joining the South Sydney Rabbitohs, where he'll reunite with his former mentor, Wayne Bennett, who obviously pulled a lot of the strings here, and there's some interesting stories that have come about why. But this one surprised me, and you and I, as guys who both work in different aspects of the media, this was the first time where there was no smoke before there was fire.
Yeah, you're probably right, Chris. And I mean, when you think about signings from going from club to club, I mean, this one, for me, the closest thing to it, I think, in recent years is probably the signing of Stephen Crichton at the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs, that sort of franchise-changing signing. The Rabbitohs have been a little bit dormant in that space for quite some time, and I think that obviously looking at the way their roster works, they need that replacement for Keelong Kalamatangi, and, they've gone about this one the right way. Obviously, Payne Haas originally, previously had been linked to things like the Sydney Roosters and things like that, where the story gets out and it was posed down, but the definitely the team there, at the Rabbitohs have done an outstanding job in this one, which is very difficult, particularly when you're working in that, fast-paced Sydney media market.
Yeah, it's an interesting space when you talk about it, and interesting seeing the news coming out today. And I don't know whether it's Wayne Bennett playing Wayne Bennett games or not, but he's essentially indicated that Latrell Mitchell apparently is pulling the strings at the South Sydney Rabbitohs, because he's come out and said, Latrell said, I want to play with Payne, let's get Payne. And so Wayne said, okay, I'll go and get it done.
Yeah, that's a little bit concerning, I suppose, when a marquee players can controlling recruitment there at the Rabbitohs. Obviously, the Rabbitohs didn't return, any calls this afternoon, which I made about 3 o'clock, looking for Mark Ellison and the likes as well. Obviously, Payne being controlled by sports player management as well. He's a manager, Ahmed. Doesn't have any more to comment on. The Rabbitohs' official statement they sent via email was they won't be making a comment, until the cooling off period. But obviously, we're in a day one of that now, so we'll have another 9 days beforehand. So I think that the power brokers at the Broncos will be trying to have a bit of influence there, Chris. But yeah, like you said, look, I think that's probably more, I don't know how that sounds to the punters, but I actually think that's probably more of a Wayne Bennett, sort of taking the pressure off the board to some extent, possibly. But no doubt, obviously, they are well linked there, Payne and Latrell, and have built that relationship previously around State of Origin. So, look, that'll be a great combination there at the Rabbitohs, no doubt.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see because, Wayne gets another one of his former pupils back, and he's got obviously an extended history of this across his coaching career, managing to bring these guys back. It obviously speaks to the level of respect and, fatherly, space that he's held with these guys. But to get Payne Haas there, David Fifita was one thing, obviously very mercurial in terms of his talent. Latrell Mitchell, we know what his ceiling looks like. But Payne Haas has been one of the more consistent performers. So to add him to that side with some of those, flashier talents, if Wayne Bennett can start to get the best out of some of these players and can figure out his halves picture for 2027, South Sydney have got to be shooting into contention.
Yeah, mate. Well, obviously, Payne, a 3-time Broncos Player of the Year. And, of course, look at his stats, earlier today. The last 3 years, he's averaged about 166 running metres, 35 tackles at 98% tackle efficiency, which is amazing numbers for any middle in the Telstra Premiership, as you know, Chris. And, he's definitely a premium buy. And, quite often we've seen so often, those playmakers taking up a major part of the salary cap. Obviously, Payne being a number one prop in the game, he's probably going to, command quite a figure there at the Broncos as well, mate. So, yeah, very, very interesting, that's for sure. But in regards to Wayne, we've seen it previously with the likes of, Bo Scott, Jeremy Smith, to a lesser extent, Alex McKinnon, bring him up from the Dragons when he was at Newcastle. We've seen it previously with even enticing Benji Marshall as well. So, he's the guy that, his strength is, particularly his age now, is probably not the X's and O's, but he's probably the greatest relationship builder in the game.
Yeah, it's certainly a space to watch, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. And obviously the question also amounts when you're looking at a medium-term contract in Haas's case here. Will Wayne Bennett be at the helm of South Sydney for all of that contract? And if not, where does that then leave South? And, Payne isn't one of these players of the Lomax ilk that's been known for not carrying out on contracts or reneging or backflipping. So I'm not suggesting anything of that ilk, but it does start to, really make you wonder when there's some new teams coming into the competition. Bennett's not extended for the full period of that contract that Haas has signed. does Bennett then, look to go, if you're Papua New Guinea, do you make a big swing for him? I don't see him going there, but, the leverage that someone like Wayne Bennett can pull, it makes you start to wonder.
Well, look, my understanding, Chris, is that, both, Wayne has been approached by both Perth and Papua New Guinea informally previously when he's obviously denied back those opportunities. So on the strength of the back of that, you could probably see him at the Rabbitohs definitely for the next 2 seasons. 3 would be a stretch. And I think Wayne always, given his age, etc., is a year-to-year proposition. He still enjoys coaching. And obviously, if you look at, some of the sessions run down there, at South Sydney, he's sort of more... His involvement is significantly lower. A lot of that stuff is held on to his assistants now. He's more of a man manager, overseer type. We saw that, a lot when he was at the Dolphins as well. So I think his longevity will remain in the game. He is a master recruiter. He's a master mentor. But I think that what he can probably bring, to Payne's game is that consistency off the field. And, if Payne was going to come to Sydney, the environment that he was going to be in would be, really, really critical. And I think that, he's a type, similar to like a Brandon Smith where wrong environment could probably maybe not work for him, but obviously the home they've had the Rabbitohs and that fatherly figure of Wayne Bennett is probably, another enticement for him to go there as well. And, just recently, I think, news breaking this afternoon, one of the reasons that he gave, to media as he's leaving Red Hill was he just needs a change. So, which is a little bit strange coming from a guy who's just coming off a Broncos grand final win. Particularly, we know how much not only the city of Brisbane but the state of Brisbane gets around that team, that he want to get away from that limelight potentially. And I don't think that necessarily signals to anything internally at the Broncos in regards to player relationships. However, maybe he wants to feel like he's going to go somewhere else and build his own legacy potentially.
Yeah, and that's obviously an interesting piece when you're a player at the level that Payne is, one of the best players in the NRL, undoubtedly. As you say, that legacy word is obviously quite interesting. And it's going to be interesting to see that environment that he comes into. I mean, he's going to be surrounded by, some like-minded guys, a guy like David Fafita that he's known for a long time too. So they'll reunite there after having come through those junior systems together. But also, it does bring him closer to home. And we know, and we're not going to delve into today, there's obviously been quite some significant challenges in his family situation, including taking on his younger brother and all these sorts of things. And he does have quite an extended family network that's based in the Newcastle area, just up the road, which does allow for it. And also, South Sydney known for, certainly for a lot of the Pacific Islander and previously the Indigenous players being that support network that works so well for them. And Wayne, again, outstanding in that space.
Yeah, mate, I think it's becoming more and more prevalent in the game where, back in the day you would coach, your 30-man roster, equally. But I think that the way that they're squeezing the orange dries, for want of a better term, with these Indigenous types, these Islanders, is really understand their culture, really understand the environment that you need to create around these players to draw the best out of the player. And I suppose that's the next step in regards to coaching and managing these players, given the fact that, realistically, if you take even a young kid from New Zealand, into the Knights junior system, by the time he's housed, clothed, etc., everything else, you're spending, somewhere between $30,000 to $40,000 on an individual player at 16. So those costs, become incrementally increased. And particularly if they become a marquee player, because, keeping them happy and to keep them grounded with that system just becomes so critical, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It'll be interesting to see. I think, I speak for most NRL, if not all NRL fans, if Payne Haas is performing well and remaining in the NRL, obviously after that threat of R360 and a departure there, that's a positive news story. And we just want to see him playing well in the competition because for mine, he's one of the best front rowers we've seen. And if he continues to develop at the rate he has to this point, he could well go down in history as one of the top-tier rugby league front rowers that we've seen. So we'll watch this space with interest as we head into 2027. He's got a job to do. Undoubtedly, he'll carry forward in 2026 with the Broncos as they look to go back-to-back. TD, we kicked off the trials on the weekend as well. We had 2 games. Let's start with the Cowboys against the Bulldogs. And it's one of the oldest rugby league adages. It's a tale of 2 halves. This one, the Cowboys got out to a 28-0 lead. Then they hung on for the absolute death. 34-30 they got home. I guess the positives to mind, if we start on the Cowboys side, Jake Clifford looked really comfortable steering this side around.
Yeah, he certainly did. Obviously, look at the lineup the Cowboys rather fielded, Chris. He's probably the most senior individual within that lineup, mate. I thought he was really good, mate. I thought his ruck ID was very good. I thought the Cowboys, probably one of their strengths was, the ability to play with a lot of width, particularly, not just in good ball, but in that midfield as well. They're prepared to attack with the football. And I think the Cowboys, traditionally, as a franchise, has always been best when they play that sort of really expansive game. Do you know what I mean? It's always been a signature of their game, particularly through those Thurston years and those Matty Bowen years. And I think looks like they're starting to go back to that as well.
Yeah, certainly, something they look to go to quite a bit there. No Tom Dearden in the side, obviously, on the weekend. I was also impressed, and I think that, Todd Payton's going to have some decisions around the outside backs. When you look at guys like Robert Derby and Mason Barber, they really stamped a claim. Again, it's only one trial, but they did what they could with the opportunity. Derby scored 2 tries. Barber's effort as well, that footwork, they look like they could be really handy, players, whether they're depth players or whether they're actually in that starting 17 in round 1. It's good to see that there's going to be some weapons there because, as you said, the Cowboys have been a side so renowned for that. When you go back through names like Matt Singh, you come forward then to, Ty Williams and then on to Kyle Felt, those sorts of players have had strike out wide. It's something they've been stacked for over the years, and it's good to see some of that coming through that pipeline again.
Yeah, mate, absolutely, mate. There's a few managers on the scene that have been comparing, young Barber to, Kalen Ponga at a similar age, mate. So, I mean, that's a pretty big rap, realistically, to have a look at where he's development-wise, I suppose, and obviously carrying, that particular name as well. It's difficult with these trials, Chris, and part of that is, sort of use of interchange and what side they're putting on the park, obviously, to get any real good gauge about the Telstra Premiership. But what it does give, it gives us an indication about where some of these younger players are, in their development and, what is their likelihood to feature. And for some of those players, it may just be that little bit of a taste, as they go back to, whether it be the junior development system or into that pathways development, New South Wales Cup, Queensland Cup system as well, about where they sit in that equation and from a needs analysis point of view, where they need to be in 12 months' time as well.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's good to see that first little taste and that first introduction. A concerning piece on the Cowboys side, they led 28-0, letting in 5 second-half tries. That was an issue last year, their defence. Todd Payton clearly still going with the theory that we'll just outscore whatever the other team can put on. It hasn't worked that well in recent years. I feel that defence probably needs to tighten up just a touch for the Cowboys if they're going to consider themselves a top 8 contender.
Yeah, mate, when you, 28-0 and you give up that sort of points, mate, I'd imagine today's video session at about 10 o'clock this morning would have been interesting, that's for sure. A lot of individuals there probably being highlighted. But I think also if you look at the structure of the lineup, the connection probably isn't there. Those guys haven't played a lot together as well. And I think that sometimes, mate, as you know, Chris, I mean, even when you're playing yourself, you play some of those weaker sides and, you think you can just put the cue on the rack, and that's definitely not the case in rugby league, mate, because at the end of the day, it's 13 men on 13 men. And, mate, their opposition, were up for the task, weren't they, and just think about what their mentality had been, what would have been said in their camp would have been interesting as well.
Yeah, certainly. I think if you're on the other side of the coin, the Bulldogs would have taken some positives out of that second half fight back. But again, that disjointed nature of different looking teams, a number of key players who would have played together in key positions last year, not only departures, but players sitting out like Crichton and co, probably impacted that. The good news for the Bulldogs, a third generation of a very famous name coming through and making a nice impact for them in young Fitzgibbon. It was very interesting seeing his old man sitting there, the current Cronulla Sharks head coach, watching his son play in a trial for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, mate, I suppose you got to take the opportunities where they lie at every club, don't you know what I mean? But if you're looking at, where development thing is at the system, some of the work there that Phil Gould's done, just with some of the staff he's brought in and bringing back, some of that really, that early to mid-2000s side, your Willie Masons and James Graham, I believe, is working there at the moment as well. There's a really good culture they're developing at the Bulldogs and that winning mentality and getting back to that defensive grit. Not that we saw it on the weekend, but that defensive grit that Bulldogs teams are really renowned for as well. But, I thought Fitzgibbon, mate, was really good. He had some really good touches as well. I thought his involvement was very good, and he's definitely a player of promise to sort of look out for in the future. Yeah,
I think that's the key. I think it is a future one. Don't get too far ahead, Bulldogs fans, Eamon Fitzgibbon. But I think he's on a 3-year deal there at the Dogs, so he's not going anywhere too soon. If we have a look at the other game, the Dragons against the Knights, 28-18. Again, very different lineups here. Some, halves looking to state their case on both sides. And that's where I want to start here, TD. Cade Reid from the Dragons was probably the pick for mine. He was very impressive. We know Sandon Smith's no slouch when it comes to a turn of pace, but he absolutely chewed him down in that rundown. He was late on a couple of tries. And again, as I said, big defensive plays. He looks like, again, someone to watch for the future. I'm not suggesting all these guys are knocking down, in these teams' cases, the door for round 1 in Vegas, but there's certainly, it's got to be reassuring for a Dragons side that probably the spine's been some areas of concern for them in recent seasons.
Yeah, certainly, man. I think that, the Dragons is, if you're a young man looking for an opportunity, the Dragons is probably the place to get one at the moment. The club is, somewhat in a bit of a rebuild phase as well. And obviously, with their coaching staff down there, are looking for those guys who've got plenty tomorrow. So, a performance like that one, like you mentioned, is definitely that, mate. The first 7 meters in acceleration is unbelievable, isn't it? Like just he's that turn of speed as well. And you saw that, on both sides of the footy too, in defence and attack, mate. So he's definitely an exciting prospect. And if there's one thing that you can't teach in football, Chris, you can teach defensive read, you can teach ID, mate, but it's very difficult to teach speed. Just ask Roger Fabry. But mate, absolutely, it's definitely one of those things that it's very acquired. But to have that that level of speed mate, speed kills.
It certainly does. I was impressed with Matt Feagai as well in the glimpses that we got of him. Josh Kerr and Blake Laurie did the tradesman stuff that we know they are good for and they'll need to do a lot of for the Dragons this season. On the flip side of the coin, Kyle McCarthy continues to nip about. Obviously, the Knights are reasonably built out in that outside backs region, and we'll get to Fletcher Sharp in terms of that mix in a little bit. But again, didn't do himself any harm with what he executed out there. Kyle, a kid who's come through, interesting, from the Dragon system to the Knights over the last couple of years and has been ever present in reserve grade.
Well, I think he turned up here November 22, Chris. So he's been some time in the system. And, you'd have to think that the next 12 to 24 months is going to be absolutely critical in the career of Kyle McCarthy. He's promised so much, mate. I like him in that centre position, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that's probably where he's best suited. So his physical development, you see his physicality's changed, his body's changed over the last couple of years as well. So, I think he did some good things. Looking, the Knights' depth in that position, obviously they've got some great starters there, the likes of Bradman Best, etc. But there is a bit of a depth there. I think he probably sits in that 23 to 24 player in that top 30, Chris. So, I think there's a very, very good chance, given the Knights' recent history with injuries, that we might see a bit more Kyle McCarthy in the Telstra Premiership.
Yeah, I think he's one. Even if we don't see a lot of him this year, if he takes a couple of opportunities, obviously Dane Gagai getting to a more advanced age might be the nice way, Tony. Neither of us are going to throw stones about age right now. But
he still goes all right, mate.
Gags is going good, but, he'll be getting closer to the end rather than the beginning. Obviously, the key talking point for the Knights has been the spine. We saw Fletcher Hunt start at fullback. We saw Sandon Smith and Fletcher Sharp start in the halves. But essentially, I feel Justin Holbrook knows what he's doing here. I don't feel like he's telling too many people. But based on what we saw, do you think someone took the lead in that role to partner Dylan Brown? For mine, I've said since day one, Sandon Smith seems the most logical choice there. Sharp offers more on the wing, and it's about how do you get the best 13 men together for mine for the Knights. But there's a lot of Knights fans that are pushing that wheelbarrow and suggesting Sandon Smith then to 9 and cross them to 13. But I think it becomes a very small team in a game where, the changes of the bench rules are going to make it even more impactful if you decide to play small ball.
Yeah, mate, look, I think the small ball in the NRL these days, probably the biggest example of small ball, you have to go back now, what did it be, 20 odd years now, the West Tigers, 2005, obviously that wonderful year they won the grand final with quite probably the most small but mobile pack under Tim Sheens. Look, in the current NRL, given the physicality of the game and realistically, we've seen a lot more dual and triple contact in that middle third channel where, you wouldn't see a lot of through in back in those sort of days as well. So, I think that these days, a lot of clubs, in their recruitment, looking for that prototypical prop forward is going to be 6'2". He's probably going to be at 104 to 109 kilos realistically. Then you've got your super heavyweights past that. Now, I think that, if you look at the successful Newcastle teams in the past, even recently, they've probably had a lot more success with that power game. We haven't had that the Knights for quite some time. And, when you're losing the likes of, guys like Adam Elliott, etc., obviously now having departed the Knights, they're sort of a little bit underdone for size, I suppose. I think that realistically, for myself, I know there's that push there, but I think, probably Sandon and then and probably the $1.2 million man, Dylan Brown, probably stay in the halves, and Carlin will be at 1. Mate, I really enjoyed what Crossland did at 9 last year. I think he was very, very patient. You can see him developing that skill set. I mean, obviously I had him at, in junior rugby league as a halfback. And I think that, I think one of the things that, Andrew Johns once explained this is that when you get to play both positions, both hooker and halfback, the understanding of the game just becomes paramount even more than ever. I think that's probably suited his game at the moment. And, Phoenix has been a young man who's had to be very adaptable. Whether he's been forced to play on the outside backs, forced to play in the halves, forced to play hooker, forced to play at lock. And I think that, realistically, from what we've seen of that position, I think that probably 9's his best spot there. He plays square and direct out of dummy half. I think there are better options there at the 13.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's the way it'll probably wash out, allowing that everyone stays fit and healthy, as you touched on before. The last one I want to give a really brief mention to, Trey Mooney, looked pretty solid. Departed the Raiders, has come to the Knights for opportunity. Obviously got a lot of growth in terms of trying to become a consistent, probably starting front row, if not first rotation. But again, first signs are promising, and probably leans to that underarching theme here across. 3 of these 4 sides didn't play finals football last year, but we've seen a lot of young talent that's positive for the depth of all these squads, I think, and that's what the trials are very exciting for, getting these first glimpses of young names coming through, playing against men and getting their first proper first-grade challenges, if you will.
Yeah, certainly, Chris. I couldn't agree more, mate. I think that, just where he sits in that equation, you can see him maybe getting a few 18th man gigs coming up. I can probably see him, playing within the first 10 rounds of the competition, realistically, about, where he sits in that combination. There's only been good things coming out of the COE about him as well, mate, of how he's prepared, in this off-season as well. So, and like you said, Chris, it's that sort of silly season. It's great to have footy back, but, you're watching a lot of guys, you actually have to get the media guide out for, maybe a bit of Googling to find out exactly who they are, for a lot of those sort of more casual fans of the game. So, yeah, it's definitely, it's a good time to have. But I mean, at the club now, realistically, we're about a month away from, the start of hostilities in Vegas, and obviously the Knights will be clamouring to find out who's going to be part of that combination. I'd have to think, personally myself, and I'm probably thinking that with Justin Holbrook, I'd imagine that it's probably 85% settled, and this one is just a bit of a mix in the measure to see, where he's going to end up, come kick off.
Yeah, have to agree there. Well, TD, a big thank you for you breaking it all down with us, NRL, getting warmed up with this trials. We'll head into a full second week of the preseason this weekend with all the teams in action, which is great. We'll have even more to talk about from there. But as always, TD, thank you very much for your time. And if people want to check out a bit of your footy content, they can find you at Newcastle Weekly.
Yes, mate, absolutely, mate. Mate, just before I let you go, I just want to give you a bit of a wrap, mate. I caught your call of the Howard Matthews and SG Ball yesterday. Obviously, Newcastle and Cronulla, mate. You're outstanding, mate. Hopefully, one day you'll be able to get to my level.
One day, mate. One day. I'll keep dreaming. A big thank you to you all for tuning in, guys. Make sure to hit like on the video. Hit subscribe on the channel as well to keep you up to date. And if you hit that bell down below, you'll get a notification every time we drop an episode. But until next time, a big thanks again for tuning into your home of the Black and White of Sports. No grey opinions here.